War. War never changes.
Hello everyone, my name is Kevin and this is the Wasteland Survivor channel. On this channel, we're talking about everything sci-fi. Robots, lasers, and you guessed it, wastelands. So if you're a sci-fi lover, a wasteland survivor, or an aspiring author like myself, you're on the right channel. So let's strap in and get to it. In this episode, I'm talking about one of my favorite games of all time, Fallout 3. Fallout 3 is a retro-futuristic, post-apocalyptic game set 200 years after nuclear war. It combines music, dress, and styles of the 40s and 50s with high-tech power armor and weaponry. This was the third entry in the series and the first to be a first-person point of view as opposed to isometric. Isometric means a diagonal view from above, as seen here. It was also the first in the series to be featured on a console instead of on the PC. The story, as has become commonplace in this series, is you are a survivor living in an underground bunker called a vault. If you've seen the show, you are familiar with this style of living. Each vault has a series of conditions and people living within it. Unbeknownst to the vault dwellers, and in some cases even the overseer, these vaults had experiments attached to them, such as making carbon copies of one person, to plants that get out of control, to even social experiments. You begin your journey as a literal baby, where your father, played by Liam Neeson, yes, that Liam Neeson, voices the model and character. Your mother dies during childbirth, and you are unfortunately there to witness it even as a newborn. It's your fault, so way to go. Soon after, the game fast-forwards you to when you are a child and you're learning the creation system for your character, known as Special. Special stands for Strength, Perception, Endurance, Charisma, Intelligence, Agility, and Luck. These are essentially your attributes, but unfortunately you can't be the best at everything. Want to be able to wield a super sledge? Well, you'll be dumb as bricks. Want to be a super scientist capable of hacking the world's most intricate systems? Well, you'll probably have the charisma of cardboard or noodles for arms. Anyway, after sitting down and basically taking some tests as though you're a 10-year-old boy or girl, you talk to some of the fellow vault dwellers and do some minor quests, such as killing a rad roach. Ew. These are infesting the vault. There's also a rival who doesn't really like you in the vault, and you're friends with a girl named Amada, and she often will defend you during this time in your upbringing. Soon after, you're a grown adult, and you see that the rest of the people that were kids alongside you are now grown with you. Then one day, your father leaves under mysterious circumstances, and at the same time, there's a radroach infestation that people are battling. They don't look like much, but they can kill the average person because they are about the size of a house cat. Since you are your father's son or daughter, you become the focus of the overseer, and they try to capture you to gain information about why your father would leave so suddenly. The basic idea, and again if you've seen the show, is no one opens the vaults for any reason. If you do decide to leave and go to the surface, that's a major problem for all of the vault dwellers. You escape and exit Vault 101, pretty much following in your father's footsteps. When you leave the vault and go through this wooden door on the other side, you lay eyes on the capital wasteland for the first time. I don't know about you, but it took my breath away. Between here and your first location are a series of dilapidated buildings, one of which I remembered was a school. That was the first building I entered. The way the developers took basic buildings such as schools and turned them into these creepy camps is a great strength of this series. They do a great job making basic locations, even like supermarkets and other office buildings, and turning them into these places filled with raiders, radroaches, ghouls, and other things. After dealing with a few tweaker raiders, I made my way to Megaton. This is a unique town with an unexploded nuclear warhead in its center. You go and meet Myra Brown. She wants you to help her create her Wasteland Survival Guide. After you decide the fate of Megaton, and there are a couple of options, you make your way through major locations in Washington, D.C., all in an effort to follow in your father's footsteps. You meet several characters such as Three Dog and some others that know about your father, eventually learning from these characters that your father and your mother were actually from the surface to begin with. They are not from Vault 101, like all of the other people that were in there. He brought you there as a baby and abandoned his work called Project Purity once your mother died. He needed to find somewhere to protect you and keep you safe. Project Purity was the answer, or supposed to be the answer, to the world's greatest issue at this time: irradiated water. It's all over the place. Every open source of water, from puddles to lakes to toilets, all have irradiated water in it. Finding clean water is a serious issue in the capital wasteland and across the world in this series. You can't drink from a lot of these water sources without gaining radiation points, which are called RADs. However, he and your mother's project hypothetically would have created enough clean water for everyone. Throughout your journey, you'll encounter many different groups of people or factions that are good, bad, or in between. The Enclave is the game's main bad guy, and they basically are trying to take Project Purity and control it for themselves. You can side with them, and they have some really cool tech. They mainly focus on slower, more powerful plasma weapons, and their power armor is pretty cool too. In comparison, you have the Brotherhood of Steel, which is a mainstay throughout the series. They're sort of a military, religious group that believes that unearthing tech and controlling it is the way of the future for them. For the purposes of this game, they are considered the good guys, but what I love about this series is there usually isn't a purely good or purely evil faction. They have their own selfish motives, but for the most part, they are going to be considered the good guys, and they're the ones who are trying to protect the capital wasteland. Their weapons are more of the laser variety, but they also have some pretty intense weapons like the missile launcher. They carry things like Gatling lasers, laser pistols, and personally, I prefer to side with them more often than the Enclave because of that sweet, sweet power armor. In the end, do you side with the Enclave? Do you side with the Brotherhood of Steel? Do you make your own choices? I'm jumping over so many fantastic quests and well-written characters. There's probably 100 to 150 hours of content in this game. But essentially, that is the main quest. So many things make this a great game, and from a writing standpoint, the setting really stands out to me. Many locations are real in Washington, and many others that are even made up feel real and appropriate, such as Megaton. It's a game you can get lost in for hours, traveling in any direction and encountering any number of ghouls, mutants, raiders, radroaches, and so on. There's even a spot in the game where, and I don't remember the building off the top of my head, if you know exactly the location that I'm talking about, please leave it in the comments below. But there's a building that you can go into that actually has like ghostly apparitions that are trying to lead you throughout the dilapidated building that's there. I thought it was a fantastic and very eerie way to try and show you some of the background in the game. The dialogue is very engaging, with characters that are anything from kooky, looking at you, Myra, to insane, to everything in between. The situations they put you in are just utterly unique in so many ways. I'll give you one example. There's a community that lives on a bridge early on in the game. I believe it's early on, depending on which direction you went first. And this community is beset by what they are convinced are vampires. When you find the vampire group, which is in a subway station, you have to decide between killing the vampire group, killing the citizens of that bridge community, or trying to work out a truce. Now, what do vampires or this community have anything to do with retrofuturistic nuclear war? Nothing. That's what makes the game so fantastic. You never know what you're going to walk into. It brings the world alive, a world that is ironically not thriving. What's left behind after nuclear war is people dealing with the situation in myriad ways. As the lone wanderer, you can react to these people in myriad ways, including shooting everyone if you want to, just for fun. Yeah, you'll quickly become a pariah that no one wants to deal with, but hey, you play it how you like. While it's a vast wasteland, there's a ton to see and do all around you. Aside from schools, there are houses, factories, parking lots, burnt trees, cracked roads, you name it. And of course, vaults. And then there are times where it is so quiet, all you hear is the wind. My writing focus for today is desolation versus emptiness. In post-apocalyptic settings, there is a fine balance between creating a world that is empty versus desolate. What I mean by that is an empty setting means that it feels very lifeless. And while a post-apocalyptic setting is going to be quote-unquote lifeless or very devoid of life, you don't want to get into a situation where it's boring. because ultimately we're here to entertain the reader, or in this case, the gamer, the viewer, and so on. You want the reader to feel that they're in an open wasteland, but if it's a sandbox with no toys, it's boring. If you've ever played an open world game like this, you might get this characteristic. It feels very open and empty and lifeless. It needs to be filled with something, whether that be creatures, buildings to look at, or people. So one of the challenges that I noticed when writing my series, especially the first novel, is trying to create this balance. I wanted it to feel like a desert wasteland, but without any discernible features, it just would feel very lifeless and ultimately boring. So I thought of some flora and fauna that I could put into my series that would make it a little bit more full of life. For example, I thought about a desert reptile, and I thought about what would happen to a desert reptile if it was irradiated. What would it look like? How would it mutate? How would it survive in these conditions? Well, it would become more brutal, at least in my opinion. So I gave it a set of horizontal as well as vertical teeth, 6 legs instead of 4, and the ability to dig and wait for prey similar to a trapdoor spider. These ideas gave birth to the Gon, which I then sprinkle in here and there, either as part of the landscape or as a direct threat to the characters. Another thing that I noticed while trying to write the series, and that I continue to work through to this day, is the fact that I don't want to go the other direction and over-describe every single aspect of the landscape. This is actually something I learned the hard way after going through my drafts. Sometimes I really wanted the reader to know every single tiny detail that the main characters were seeing. But what ended up happening is this sort of, I'm going to call it the uncanny valley of writing effect. And what I mean by that is when over-description becomes more confusing than helpful. It's like the details are so on the nose that it becomes a blender of description. As I've written, and this continues to be something I practice to this day, I don't want to over-describe and give this quote-unquote uncanny valley effect. In other words, less is more. You want to give the tone and the broad strokes of what is happening, but you don't want to make the reader feel every single inch of the scene. You'd rather have the reader create the picture in their mind. And that's what happens sometimes when people are reading the same book. Two readers can come up with slightly different interpretations while still getting the scene in their head. I'll give you an example of something that is overwriting and over-describing. This is an example that I wrote, but this is also based off of what I've read in other books. The 6'6" tall man with a brown hat had 5 stains on it. As he moved past the purple and green floral patterned tablecloth, his hazel eyes scanned the 10 by 10-foot room. A black cabinet with 3 drawers stood in one corner. The middle drawer opened to reveal 6 sheets of paper. In the other corner, a multi-layered stand had 7 picture frames on it. Families with 3 kids in each. Confusing? Are your eyes glazing over? I know mine were, and I was the one who wrote it. It becomes too much clutter in the reader's mind, and they have too many things to try and keep track of. The reason I bring this up is because I'm guilty of doing this myself. I wanted the reader to know every single inch of that room in this example, but then I realized that by the time the reader gets to the end of that paragraph, chances are they're going to have to go back to the top of the paragraph just to get all of those details again. And what was the point of those details? They're completely unnecessary. Now, this is something that actually happened in Victorian literature, where there are some authors that wanted to talk about how the wallpaper came from, a certain place in another country 14 years ago. And there's a description of every single aspect of the house that they're in. But going on for 4 or 5 paragraphs about the wallpaper isn't endearing or cute anymore. Just get to the point. So what I did is then I edited it, and I decided that I'm going to take out some details and try and shorten it so that you still get a similar picture without it being overly cluttered. Ready? The tall man wore a brown stained hat. He passed the floral tablecloth, his hazel eyes scanning the black cabinet, one drawer ajar. He turned to the picture frames on the tiered stand to examine the families. Now, that is not the only way to edit that paragraph, and you may have thought of different ways to edit it yourself, and that's the beauty of writing. But that's the point I'm trying to make. Just get to the point, or the readers will stop reading. At the very least, they begin skimming, and all of that hard work that you just did over describing everything gets lost. So, if you're a writer, what have you learned about landscape descriptions? Or what have you learned about descriptions in general? I hope this has helped. And if you played Fallout 3, what's your opinion of it? While you're at it, check out my novel series, A Spark in the Ashes, with Book 1, The Vital Link, in all major and minor outlets. And keep an eye out for Novel 2. Just remember, war
War never changes.